Hello, everybody. This is Carol Maletta. Welcome to the Parenting 411 podcast, where we share information parents need from sources they can trust. As you know, I once hosted a talk radio show for several years in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. As we do here, we examined a variety of parenting issues and had many rich discussions. Occasionally, I like to share them here at the Parenting 411 podcast. Today, I offer for your listening and enlightenment a conversation I had with psychologist and author Dr. James Jones and his colleague, Dr. Lynnette Crews. The title is Can We Really Be All Right? Overcoming Child Abuse and Conquering Mental Illness in Adulthood. I hope you find it as interesting as I did. Today, we're going to take a look at a journey taken by our first guest, Dr. James Jones. He is a psychiatrist and an author of I'm All Right, which is an account of his experience as a survivor of child abuse. The topic of our segment today is, Can we really be all right? Overcoming child abuse and a look at adult mental health. Dr. Jones has been a psychiatrist for 27 years, and today he performs forensic psychiatric evaluations at the Justice Juanita Kidd Stout Center for Criminal Justice. He also performs psychiatric evaluations for Gaudenzia, for individuals who seek to recover from mental health and substance abuse disorders. He brings a measure of compassion to those individuals he has the honor to treat. Hello, Dr. Jones.
Hello, Carol. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
And I'm really happy to have you. And let's start off here. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about your educational and your professional background?
Sure. I was born in Newark, New Jersey, but raised in Philadelphia. I went to an academic all-boys public high school, Central High, Philadelphia, in Philadelphia. I went to Community College of Philadelphia for 2 years, where I received an associate's degree in chemical technology. I then transferred to St. Joseph's University, where I earned a bachelor's degree in biology, and then I was able to attend Temple University School of Medicine, where I continue with my training in psychiatry.
Okay. Now, tell us about I'm All Right and how you came to write this book.
Sure. About 2 years ago, I was going through a personal struggle, going through some marital difficulties, and I was in the midst of my own individual therapy. And I come from a background where I was physically and emotionally abused, and throughout my high school and college years, I always thought I had some form of depression, mild form called dysthymia, more serious form called major depression, but that never quite seemed to be right for me. And I felt that since I had went through some measure of trauma, I would always wondered if I was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, but I never had one of the hallmark symptoms of flashbacks where you kind of re-experience something that happened traumatic in your past. Until 2 years ago, as I was watching the movie 12 Years a Slave, and as I was watching that movie, as the title character was being whipped, the sound, the very action kind of triggered a past memory for me. And even though I was in my own individual therapy at the time and also am a psychiatrist, I never really was trained on how to treat individuals who come from a traumatic background. So the therapist that I was working with, unfortunately, was not skilled in that area. And that led me to at least do my own personal research in regards to, how I can help myself and then what would be the best type of therapist for me. And that led me to the journey of my book, because as I was reading information, I was able to plug in and then connect with a therapist who was able to help me, of course. But also I was gathering information and I thought was so helpful. And it wasn't, to me, just okay for me to receive my healing and recovery. I had to share my experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in doing that, I came up with my book, I'm All Right. And the way I came with the title is, I'm All Right is actually a verbal reflex to the question, how are you? It's something that we all commonly do. Someone asks you, how are you doing? You're going to say, I'm all right. And that's pretty standard. For the most part, at least I'll just say for myself, when I said I'm all right to that question, I really wasn't answering honestly. I was struggling with personal issues. I was filled with shame and guilt as a young adult. And I was just saying it to kind of keep the conversation moving. The issue with that is most people really don't want to know how are you. They just want to ask the question to keep it moving. But what I missed was, and during my journey, was that there were people that really did want to help, and I missed the opportunity to receive that help. So I thought that was such an apt title because it's something that people can, something that can resonate with people, and it shows that, you know, we all kind of say that, but like, are we really all right?
Right. Right. Yeah, and that's you know, exactly why I entitled the show, Can We Really Be All Right? Because some people wonder, like after they've had a traumatic past, they wonder if they really ever can move past it. And your book is just phenomenal. And it does not only demonstrate your personal journey, but it does a lot. I mean, it's just packed with so much background information. I mean, I intend to, there were definitely some areas that I bookmarked that I want to just read a little more closely because just about the field of psychiatry, the history of mental health treatment in this country for African Americans, and just so much. And then it also, I also plan to share the book with my mother. She was a psychiatric nurse and later moved into administration, but she that was what she built her career on, and she really enjoyed that field and really enjoyed working with people and helping them to overcome the challenges that they faced.
Sure. You know, one of the interesting things in writing my book is I've read many very good books in regards to trauma, and as you look at the back of my book, there's several books that I use as resources. But what I find that makes my book a little bit different is that there are a lot of experts who write about trauma, but no one writes it on a personal level. Even some who may experience trauma, they write in a way in which there's some emotional distance between their trauma and what they're doing today. And I think to some people, at least for me, as I was my thirst to gain more and more knowledge, I wanted to read something about somebody that I could connect to. I thought the only way that I could do that is to write about the things that I struggle with in a frank and transparent fashion, so that you're not just looking at Dr. Jones, who has all the experience as a psychiatrist. Of course, you should know that, but also as a fellow survivor, so you can connect with it on a human basis. And also, there's also this conversation that we have sometimes in the African American community that, you know, African Americans don't seek mental health treatment. And that's really not true. The truth of the matter is we don't trust those providers' treatment. And if we can gain trust in the people that we require treatment from, we will seek treatment. Because I've gotten many people who come up to me after having a conversation with me who will, you know, since they feel comfortable talking, that they will ask me if I can't see them, can I refer them to somebody based on the interaction. But there's a historical element to that, and I write about that in the book.
Okay. Well, and for a moment, I want to take a time to define child abuse, because I think people have different ideas about what it is. And so according to Child Help, the organization, and you can look this up at childhelp.org, child abuse is defined as when a parent or caregiver, whether through action or failing to act, causes injury, death, emotional harm, or risk of serious harm to a child. There are many forms of child maltreatment, including neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, exploitation, and emotional abuse. And the reason I wanted to read that is because there's some that would think, well, child abuse always entails physical abuse and always entails violent abuse, when, of course, we see that that's not necessarily the case. So, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no problem. So there's a lot of research out there that points to the long-term effects of child abuse. So do you see many adults in your work who trace their current mental health challenges to child abuse?
Oh, most definitely. And one of the things that I find most interesting, and I really want to continue to do more reading and eventually more writing, in the fact that I actually think that trauma in of itself is really underdiagnosed, and it's not necessarily assessed because a lot of mental professionals, they may ask questions, and depending on the situation and scenario, the person may not give you the answer directly, but there are some indirect ways in which you can look at abuse. And what I'm really seeing in the course of my career, the vast majority of the adults that I evaluate, they have some level of trauma in their background. And then these same individuals will also have a lot of drug and alcohol usage. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people will look at the drug and alcohol usage as a failure in their character, mm-hmm. But not take into account that, you know, if you come from a background where you're being severely abused, drugs and alcohol becomes an escape mechanism. But then there's, you know, behaviors and patterns of acting out that are associated with the drug use, but the core issue was the trauma. Mm-hmm, so mm-hmm. the individuals that I treat, you know, I often help them to see the connection between, you know, their substance abuse use and even some mental illness, because a lot of symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder in the face of drug and alcohol use can mimic a lot of mental health disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar, major depression. But the major issue is the trauma. So if the trauma is not treated, it doesn't make a difference if someone goes to a rehab. It doesn't make a difference if they're put on psychiatric medications. If we ignore the trauma, the behaviors will kind of reoccur. So we have to address the trauma. But here's the most important part. I tell all trauma survivors it's vitally important, number one, that you work with someone that has some experience in dealing with trauma, because not every therapist does. Just as if you were having a baby, you wouldn't see a psychiatrist. If you have a broken leg, you wouldn't see a cardiologist. You see the specialist. So you need to see a specialist that can help you with trauma. That's number one. But the most important thing is that the trauma survivor, you follow your own lead. Do not have anyone push you to talk about something that you're not ready for. Because what happens is, in a session, when someone's going through some horrific abuse and they begin to talk about it, sometimes it may become unsettling for them. And so if the therapist that they're working with is not skilled in dealing with that, that's a problem. But the other thing is the person gets scared, and then they might want to stop. But if the therapist kind of pushes them, it's not going to work. But the other issue with that is trauma survivors are so used to people controlling them. So when you tell them they have to do it, you really are re-traumatizing them. Even though the therapist intention is good, but you really re-traumatize the person. It's better for them to own their whole treatment. And once they do that, then they blossom, then they can persevere through the difficult times in therapy.
And so sometimes with the people that you work with, do they also then turn around? Have they abused children? Do they turn that around and kind of bring that into the next generation? Sure.
There's certainly a lot written about that type of situation, because if you look at it, if someone is raised in a traumatic background, whether, it's physical, emotional, sexual abuse, becomes what their norm is. And so it's easy for them to kind of continue with those behaviors. In the course of my work with people, it really is pivotal that I try to empower people to seek their own help through their trauma, but to not ignore the trauma as an issue. I will support someone, encourage them, but also then, again, tell them they have to seek treatment on their own pace. But however, it's very important that it's dealt with, because like you said, if not, there's a strong possibility they'll repeat the behaviors that they've been accustomed to.
Right.
Or being exposed to, rather.
All right, then.
We'll be right back after this. You love your kids.
You do your very best for them. But sometimes it feels like it's just not enough. And you're so sure you're the only one who feels this way. The truth is, you're not alone. It is also true that there are some things you're doing quite right. And there's a community who would love to exchange ideas with you. I'm Carol Maletta, creator of the Parenting 411, a portal for parents where I share information parents need through webinars and masterclasses. And not only that, the parents there support each other on this amazing journey in the Parenting 411 community group on Facebook. I can't wait to meet you in the community.
And we're back with the Parenting 411.
So next, I would like to bring on our next guest, and that is Dr. Lynnette Crews. In recent days, Dr. Crews successfully defended her dissertation on a professional development design in middle management in a large nonprofit, a quantitative analysis. She is currently a social worker within a nonprofit organization. She currently works with individuals that are in substance abuse recovery that are being reacclimated into the community. Dr. Crews has been working in this field for over 30 years. Good afternoon, Dr. Crews.
Good afternoon, Carol. How are you? And thank you for that beautiful introduction and for having myself and Dr. Jones on.
Yes, well, welcome. I'm so glad that both of you had time to join me. So let's tell our listeners a little bit about your professional background and then also how you came to know Dr. Jones.
Okay, so I don't know if your listeners know, but Carol and I had the dubious honor of going to the same undergraduate together, which is Cheney University. And after that, I obtained my master's from Temple. And it was at that point that I started working in nonprofits, but I started working with developmental disabilities and then switched over into mental health, drug and alcohol. One of the organizations that I worked with, I had the dubious pleasure and honor of working with Dr. Jones, and that's how we met. I was the director and he was the psychiatrist. And we were working with mentally ill, substance abuse, co-occurring disorders. And from that point, that's how we met and that's how we worked, and it's been wonderful.
Oh, okay. Okay, now, so how does it feel to have crossed that last hurdle defending your dissertation?
Surreal. I can't get past it. My resilience, someone had asked me, what did I learn from the process? And I said that I learned that I'm more resilient than I thought I could ever be, because I am someone who went back for their doctorate, in their 50s. So, a little harder than the youngsters that were in class, but, I learned my resilience. I learned that I could do more than what I thought I could. Okay. And I have to say that your show is the first time that I'm really hearing my name pronounced as doctor, and I'm just like, wow.
Oh, okay. Well, you deserve it and bask in it because you certainly worked hard. Now that you've earned that distinction, what's next for you?
I will I'm looking to, because my dissertation is on leadership and how to look at folks. A lot of folks come into a leadership position but have not had training in how to exactly be a leader. So sometimes you might see individuals that, they may be doing very well on the surface, but they're kind of, like grasping at straws every day. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? You might see organizations with a lot of high turnover. So, what's driving that? And a lot of times it's coming from the leader. So I want to be the person who writes this program, training seminar on leadership, and to go into organizations and empower and teach our individuals to be leaders. Okay.
Well, that sounds like something that's definitely needed in many organizations, nonprofit and also in the for-profit arena.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And even with, with the work that Dr. Jones and I do, is as he was saying earlier, empowering the individuals that we work with, which is also a form of leadership, to, take responsibility for their treatment and to move forward in ensuring that they start to take care of themselves in the right way versus the self-medicating way, if you will.
Okay. So let's just open it up and talk now. Dr. Jones, I did want to ask you very quickly, so what has been the reaction of family members and friends and just close associates to your book, I'm All Right?
Sure, I've had a variety of experiences with it. And I guess what I would say, one of the experiences I remember first was a colleague of mine. I told I was going to write this book and I was going to share some personal information, and I was almost admonished. I was, I don't know if I would do that, And I thought about it for like maybe a millisecond, and then as I was saying earlier, if I don't include that, then my book is really no different than a lot of other excellent books that are already out there. So that was one of the first initial challenges I got from a colleague. And I also thought that when I wrote the book, I was writing the book what I thought was a limited audience to African-American Christian child abuse survivors. But the wonderful thing that has happened is I've gotten feedback from people who are not African-American, who are not Christian, who are not child abuse survivors, who respond to the basic humanity. So it was very important I put in a lot of my own vulnerabilities in the book because it really resonates on a human level. And what I also found that was interesting, I thought also that I might be writing to people who would be my patients. But what I'm also seeing is that as I'm writing the book and telling people about the book, I get to talk to many of my colleagues who, because I shared that I had child abuse in my background, that they then began to share their own story. So it actually is creating a conversation, which I thought was phenomenal. Now, within my own biological family, my greatest wish and desire that I would be able to have that same conversation within my family. But the whole issue with trauma is everybody's journey is different, and everybody's road to healing may not be as direct, say, as mine was. So some members of my family, my brother who was willing to have a conversation with it, even my mother was able to have a real healing conversation with. But some of my other siblings, they're not quite there yet, and that's fine. That's really fine. But it was interesting in that regard. So I had a variety of responses, but it's been overwhelmingly positive. It's given me a lot of opportunities to be able to talk about the issue of trauma. Like today, I'm having an excellent opportunity to talk with you today. So it really is kind of my whole goal is really just to create a conversation where people could not live in the shadow of shame and guilt, and they can stand in their own truth. The things that have happened to you are not your fault, but just because that happened to you, doesn't mean you can't still live a meaningful and positive life.
So let me ask you, because you did talk about your original idea that this book would probably be geared toward African Americans of Christian faith who also experienced child abuse. But I wonder, do you find that in our community, the African American community, that people find these modalities, faith and religion versus therapy, do they find those two modalities to be mutually exclusive, you find?
Well, I think for the most part, our community is really open to that. I think part of the conversation that I have with people is sometimes we have a misconception about what Christian faith is. Some people think that it's going to church, every Sunday, regardless, tithing, faithfully, memorizing the Bible, when really it's just a relationship with Christ. So when I talk to people, what I'm always surprised, I may have talked to patients who are clients who are not everyday churchgoers, but they know the Bible well, they know the principles well. And so it's really about just connecting with them on a spiritual level, that's very helpful. And it's also something that's, to me, has been vitally important, where I understand that there's some things that we can do with psychiatry, certainly I can do with medication, but there's that spiritual realm that's vitally important and transformative. So that's also important to bring into the room when I'm talking to the individuals that I see. And part of my whole mission also is also to kind of create this conversation within the church structure itself. And I belong to Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church in Philadelphia, and I'm having an opportunity to impact my church in regards to being able to talk about these various issues.
Okay.
So I'm blessed that I have a church that's open to that conversation. Many churches are not, but it's really important to kind of connect all the elements of healing. It's not any one thing. It's really a whole picture of things.
Okay. And Lynnette, how about Dr. Crews? I'm sorry.
Oh, please.
So how does it come up in your work? I mean, in terms of people's perceptions about the role of religion or therapy or both, and helping them to solve their problems?
I think a lot of times, as Dr. Jones was saying, people are open and receptive. They may not talk about it as much, but, in our culture, religion is, very forefront because that's how we grew up. However, as we start talking to people, they are open to therapy, which is a wonderful thing. So like Dr. Jones was saying earlier, there's always that misconception that our culture is not open to therapy, where in actuality we are. Also, I wanted to piggyback on what Dr. Jones was saying, because a lot of times he and I will work with individuals and we don't know what's going on. So when we do their biopsychosocial, which is a tool that we use to give background information on the individual, we will start hearing what their childhood is like and what happened. And for Dr. Jones and I, the pieces of the puzzle start coming together. We will sit down and do the assessment and say, well, there's the trauma. Looks like that's what, triggered going forward. So, we are able to do that. But again, it's getting the individual to be able to build that trust, to be able to talk to us. And that's a key piece, building that trust, which Dr. Jones does do as a psychiatrist.
Okay, we have another caller. Let's bring our caller on.
Hi.
Hello, thank you for calling.
Hi, my name is Gloria McGuire. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Very good. I just want to give y'all some experience. I mean, not experience, because you sound like y'all got it all. I was born in Baltimore City, back in the 40s, and I've been a community activist for about 60 years, all in the city and in the county as well. And what I see, and I know the change of what the behavior and everything, and I try to eat properly, and I know certain foods affect people's minds and everything. When I was growing up, my aunt was heavy on hummus and chillings, all that salty food, and it affected them, But when I got older, and growing up, I know to change my habits.
Okay.
So I've been in the community. I've been an activist since 1958.
Okay.
Baltimore City, and then I end up getting the positive stuff from my aunts and uncles. So when I got older, I started my own business. Okay, I just, later on, I went to college and I didn't get a degree, but I ended up going a year and a half. But in the meantime, I was just using that good wisdom. I ended up having 2 assisted living facilities dealing with the elderly folks. Been in the service. I had worked in different hospitals getting that experience. That's why I started my assisted living home.
Okay, and so how is this working with child abuse or adult mental health?
Well, I was going to get to that as well. What's going on now? Because I'm aware, and you should be aware of too, all the drugs, all the problems that are facing young people these days. And until we get to the nucleus, the main source is those drugs and the stuff that they're dealing with. Because young people, and I know young people already stated and said we're going to lose this generation. And teachers now are teaching young kids at an early age.
Right.
And you probably heard, like, young people say, well, I probably want to live past 21. They could care less. Because there's so many bad habits, like the cigarettes, chemicals, and the food that they eat, and it's causing serious problems, and it's caused them to act out the way they acting out.
Right. So it sounds like you're saying then that they need guidance about nutrition and basic care, and then also to steer clear of drugs and alcohol. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, but it's happening because they're getting their liquor, they get these new drugs coming in.
Yes.
Cigarettes, we know about cigarettes because I remember when politicians was running for office, they took out tobacco from America and shipped it into another country and put all these chemicals in there. So now you got these tobacco stores are popping up.
Right. Okay. Well, I thank you very much for you've given us a lot to think about all the forces that are at work in society and affecting our health. But thank you so much for calling.
Okay. Have a good one.
Okay. You too.
You know what, Carol? The caller just said something interesting that perhaps we can touch upon.
Yes, he said he had a lot.
He had mentioned that you have some young people who don't think that they will live beyond the age of 21. He attributed to diet and the drugs, but then I would maybe challenge that, and I really think it really is related to trauma. Yeah. I actually had an opportunity to work with many adults who are from the Baltimore area, and Baltimore is just your areas. Where we're calling from, there's a lot of drugs in Baltimore, no doubt, and a lot of violence. But there's also a phenomenal amount of trauma. And what's really happening is there's this concept with post-traumatic stress disorder called complex PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's a little bit different than the traditional post-traumatic stress disorder, where there's one singular event, a car accident, a rape, an assault that kind of sticks in a person's head, and that they kind of relive the experience. That's one type of post-traumatic disorder. What's happening in our community has more to do with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And what that is you have trauma that happens over such a long period of time that the trauma becomes normal. So you have someone who's incarcerated and experienced with trauma, prisoners of war experience trauma, children such as myself growing up in a house where there's a lot of domestic violence, that becomes normal. So in the streets of Baltimore, these children who then become adults witness people being murdered. They witness violence, and they hold that into themselves. So when someone who's 21 years old think they're not going to live to be 30, it's because they see people being killed. Yes. So they kind of figure that is normal, that's to be expected. So then they engage in gun violence, not just because they're angry, irritable kids, it's because they're afraid. So I'm going to shoot you before you shoot me. Understand that I may not live to be 30 because their friends are being killed at 21, 25, 26. It's the world that they know. So I really think it has the drugs, again, it's just self-medicating to deal with fear and the shame that you're dealing with. But I really think it's the underlying violence and trauma that's really going to just drive these young people to do the things that they do.
Right, I agree.
I would definitely agree. I live in Chester, Pennsylvania, which, as you know, has a very, very high crime rate. And Doctor and I have talked about this many times. I see the children in the schools sometimes, and the trauma that he was just describing, the complex trauma, is all these kids know. They grow up with it. It's in their house. That's all they know. That's all they see.
Right.
And, it's just a sin. How many children see people killed, and to them, they're almost like they're immune. It's the norm. That's not the norm, but it is, and because that's all they know. So like Doctor was saying, and I agree, you have them growing up because their thing is, I have to protect myself. That's all they know. And unfortunately, the parents are not educated to deal with this complex trauma because they've dealt with it, all their lives, because reciprocal. So, it's just a vicious cycle, as Doc was saying.
Yeah, I agree. And what do you see happening? Like perhaps I know you all are in Pennsylvania, So let's start there. Do you know of any institutions or any organizations that are kind of doing a good job of, bringing parents in, making them aware of this long-term effect of trauma that their children have taken as normal, and that at some point we've got to break the cycle if they're going to be healthy? Are there any organizations that you see that are doing that?
I personally don't see anyone doing that type of work, and that's pretty much the focus of, my work now, trying to bring an awareness, because I think what's happening is all the elements of trauma are being done in a piecemeal fashion. So if someone has a substance abuse issue, they go to rehab. If they have mental health, they go to a mental health facility. If they act out because of the elements of trauma, they become incarcerated. But no one's looking at the whole picture. So I really want to have a conversation where we look at things in a holistic way. Because even with me and Dr. Crews, when we worked together at Adulthood, we would have our treatment team meetings. We would try, as a team to kind of put those elements together to kind of support the individuals that we serve, but also to educate them at the same time. So as I mentioned earlier, I really think a lot of the things that we're seeing that people are struggling with really has trauma at its very core. So I would like to be able to have conversations where we can look at that, not blame the person, not kind of divide the care, but kind of create a care package that is more holistic and is inclusive of all the elements that the person struggle with.
Right. And
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it's like getting, like what they're dealing with. It sounds like what you're saying is that they're dealing with treatment for the behavior or the habits that present themselves at that moment. So that's like the tip of the iceberg. They're not really dealing with what's under the surface.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's, it all comes into, as, Dr. Jones and you were saying, Carol, educating everyone. Our parents need to be educated. Our teachers need to be educated. Our legislation needs to be educated. Folks, we need to be going into schools teaching this. We need to be having, if you will, town meetings on this. People need to be educated, because if they're not, then we have, like your doc was saying, this piecemealing, and it's not healthy. It's not good.
We'll be right back after this.
As the saying goes, mother's work is never done, except when it really is. I'm talking about my new book, Mother's Work, Pearls of Wisdom and Gems from My Journey. I share my transformation from an outmanned, overwhelmed mom of twin boys to a parenting strategist and consultant, and being honored as DC Mother of the Year by American Mothers Incorporated. In Mother's Work, I tell you about the 7 guideposts that kept me anchored as I weathered the peaks and valleys of motherhood. Grab your copy at carolmaletta.com/motherswork.
And we're back with the Parenting 411.
Right.
And Dr. Crews said it. Well, she said it's so right, because part of the job is the teaching and sharing information, and we teach our community to advocate for services. Because my process in regards to that, if I talk to care providers or funding sources about the need for trauma, the first thing they're going to look at is, well, Dr. Jones wants to open up a clinic so he can make a bunch of money, and he doesn't really care about it. So what I try to do is to have the individuals that I treat educate them so they can then call their legislators, ask for funding, and ask for programs. Because it's easy for them to dismiss me because I'm a doctor with a nice suit that wants to make money. Fine. But when your constituents are asking for this, these are the people that's going to vote you in or out of office. They know what they want now because they've been educated. I want you to tell them no. Instead, see what happened with your career. So our job also is to educate the community, because they really look at us as, educated care providers, as we have all the answers, but the answers lie with you. You have all the power. Once they understand that, then there's a shift.
Well, now, let me ask you this. Do you see any patterns along socioeconomic lines within the clientele that you serve? Dr. Jones, I'll ask you first.
In regards to trauma?
Yes.
Yeah. To be honest with you, trauma transcends socioeconomic levels. Okay. The behaviors that you're going to see is going to pretty much be, and the only difference is people who have means have a way of hiding their behaviors within their family members. You can send them to far-off places. You'll make sure you have services because you can afford the services. You can, people with high socioeconomic levels tend to be more educated, so they can make sure they have specific needs. So on its face, it looks like people who are at the lower socioeconomic level struggle the most. But I will tell you some of the most devastating cases that I've seen of people with means, because they've been coddled and not looked. The issue really hasn't been addressed. Because again, if we're talking about physical abuse or domestic abuse within a household, no one wants that information to get out. So it's better for Johnny to be identified as a bipolar disorder person or somebody who struggles with drugs than to look at the fact that Johnny was abused by an uncle or whoever in the house. So that information is going to be hidden from those who have means because they don't want that to be known. While the people that don't have the means, that many times as adults, they've spiraled into homelessness, incarceration, where they have nothing. There's no reason to hold these secrets. So I think it's across the board, but it's hard to get to with people who have means because they're able to keep the secret better.
Okay. Now,
I would agree.
Now, Dr. Crews, I want to ask you, because I know you have been working in the field a long time as well, as you described. So how do you think the perception of psychiatric treatment has changed in our community since you first entered the field?
I think it is much more accepting. I do see folks are seeking out treatment more, and the myth, if you will, like I said earlier, like Dr. Jones said earlier, that our culture does not seek out treatment is just that a myth, because we do. So yes, I have seen the paradigm shift.
So it has been a shift.
How we look. Yes.
So initially they were more hesitant, and now you're seeing that they are more willing.
For me, yes.
Okay. All right. And so now I want to ask you, I wonder, because I've talked with psychologists, and they have said that they, people that I know personally have said that they've seen a spike in the last couple of years because of just all that's going on in the news and all of that they've sort of seen a spike in the number of patients who seek out treatment or have increases in visits from existing patients. Have you all seen anything like that, Dr. Jones?
I don't necessarily see a spike in regards to anything recent, but what I do think that's really happening is as more individuals of color see individuals of color who are able to provide treatment, I think that causes individuals to be able to reach out. And also in the area of social media, the internet access, we have much more access to be able to seek out mental health professionals. So I think that might be playing more of a role than any pivotal incident, because, we've always, as a group, have always had to endure a lot of trauma, discrimination, things in regards to that. So that's not changed. But our access to people who look like us, I think that has had the greatest impact, I believe.
Okay.
I would agree.
Okay.
I would definitely agree.
Okay. We had talked a little bit about this before, actually a couple of months ago, about minding your mental health. And we talked, and I asked the psychologist that was on the show at that time, okay, so when do people know that I can't rely solely on my faith, or I can't just kind of hold this in or rely on talking to my friends about a problem and just instead making that transition to therapy? When is it that you do that? And so she talked about, when it stops you from functioning, and it's your basic daily tasks in life. when you just can't really do that, and you're kind of actually maybe wreaking havoc in your daily life, your relationships with your family, or how you're performing on your job and just taking care of yourself, then any of those things, then you probably need to go and seek care, because what you're relying on is not enough.
Yeah, but also what's important, though, it's really important for church leaders to also partner with their congregation, because what happens is everything you said is true, but if you're in a church community that tells you that you need to pray more, and they challenge that, they're going to say you're not able to function because you're not praying enough, you're not attending church enough. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of churches are very sensitive and supportive of mental health treatment. So a pastor of the church or your leader of the church could say, yes, you can go to church and pray, but also seek mental health treatment. That creates the opportunity. But if it's being told when you talk to someone, a leader in your church, and they're telling you to pray more, read this Bible verse, but, you're psychotic,
mm-hmm.
Or you're having flashbacks, well, that really is not going to help you,
mm-hmm.
because what I write in my book, and it's vitally important that I talk about, and this is really speaking to the Christian community, that God created everything in the world. So it's okay to go to church and speak to your pastor, but it's also okay to see a therapist. And sometimes within the church community, that has to be clearly communicated to the congregation so they know that it's okay. It's not like my faith is not strong enough or I'm not a good Christian. Because otherwise, people really look for us in leadership positions to really give them some direction. But we have to give them a direction that's honest, realistic, and helpful to the individual.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well,
it goes right back to educating folks.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's everyone right, working Crews. Hand in hand together. It definitely goes back to educating.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. And there was something, there were lots of things that you talked about in your book, but there was one section, there was or one quote that I saw that was, with all of the treatment and, what that you had sought out, you learned how to end the relationship with trauma. Mm-hmm. And some people, you kind of don't realize how we hold on to the relationship with trauma when we really don't have to, and that there is help out there, and that,
yes.
And, people, a lot of times when people do venture out and try to talk about the challenges of their childhood and some treatment that they had, they think that, people respond to them and say, oh, get over it and all of that.
Yes,
but they just kind of forget that there's some fundamental needs that children have, and that things like emotional security and belonging, they're not learned or acquired. They come through healthy relationships.
Yes.
And so, and we're at a profound loss. Children are at a profound loss if they don't have those stakes in their lives. And in turn, adults who move forward without those stakes in their lives, they're at a profound disadvantage for functioning. Yes, so I want to make sure that our listeners know where they can find your book. I did mention Amazon. Is there any other source where they could find your book?
It's primarily available at Amazon.com. It's available both in print and as an ebook. Some people prefer ebooks rather than the actual printed version.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm currently working on an audiobook version, which probably will be available within the next few weeks, but that also will be available through Amazon, through the Audible app.
Okay. And so what's next for you, Dr. Jones?
Well, right now, my major focus is really getting the word out about trauma. As I was talking about before, talking about trauma, there's many different presentations. But also, I'm also interested in writing a second book as a follow-up about people's experience to my first book, I'm All Right. So I'm really focused on really encouraging trauma survivors not to live in shame and guilt, to seek help and to stand in their truth, and to create a community where it's okay to be able to talk about your experiences so that you can not only free yourself from them, but you can also help others.
Okay. And I want to just very quickly share some strategies that I found during my research. And this was at childwelfare.gov, and it talks about how to help children or youth overcome their traumas. And this can be for educators, it can be for caregivers or others that work with children. But do your best to build strong connections and talk to the children about building strong connections with family and friends that are supportive. Allow the children to feel their feelings. Don't try to talk them out of their feelings. Be consistent in terms of being there for the child and being able to talk to them and help them. Be patient with the child because they may have some reactions to the trauma that bubble up in ways that might not be productive, but because you're there, you can help them to channel it in more productive ways and to seek treatment for it.
As always, I appreciate your tuning into this special episode from my conversation collection. I hope that something was said that made you think just a little bit differently about mental wellness, yours and that of those you love. Like and subscribe to the Parenting 411 podcast and share it with a friend. Follow me at the Parenting 411 on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. In coming days, I will be unveiling the details of my annual Parent and Purpose Summit. I don't want you to miss that. And remember, it is never too late to be the parent you want to be.